Listen up.
Welcome to the PowerShell Podcast.
It's going to be an intense, kind of scary ride.
The podcast for PowerShell and the PowerShell community. And now, here's your host, Andrew Plaw.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the PowerShell Podcast. Thank you all for joining me. And if you didn't know, every single Monday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, we premiere new episodes on YouTube. There's an awesome chat there where we have some good conversations. We can talk about the episode. We can talk about really whatever you want. Occasionally, the speakers join us as well, so it's a good time. Would love to see more people in there as we keep delivering on Mondays. And this week, I am going to try some cool new things on the pre-show. And to start it off, I want to highlight a module called the Emoji module. So install module Emoji, written by James Brundage. It is a PowerShell module to help you work with emojis and list emojis and find emojis, because there are a lot more emojis than you would suspect. At least for me, I was like, wow, I'm definitely only making use of the smiley faces and the thumbs up. So there's a lot more you can do there, and you can use it from PowerShell. Very cool project. Shout out to James. Start automating. The next module that I'd like to highlight is Power Hunt Shares. So this is a project that is designed to check on your SMB shares, check for excessive privileges, and get some more information and insight into that. And it is accompanied with some really cool resources. There's a blog, a video, and of course, accompanying slides. So just another tool to help you get a better handle on your environment and sort of following that list of projects that you can bring internally and start getting value out of with sort of a low barrier to entry compared to doing it all yourself. And that's what we love to see in the community. We're taking advantage of other people's works. We're working together to make something cool. Another cool website that I saw this week in my findings was firstpr.me. And that is a awesome way to query what your first pull request was. Because honestly, I had no clue. And apparently, my first pull request was adding a function to the PSUtil module in the PowerShell Framework Collective project. So I think I've talked about that a couple times in the podcast before. Shout out to Fred for working with me on that and helping me get that contributed and committed and showing me a lot of stuff along the way. Because I had this idea for a way to improve his tool, and he was more than willing to help me help him. So shout out to Fred, and shout out to firstpr.me. Check it out. I'm curious what your first PR was. Next up, we have a really cool project from one of my favorite peeps, MDGRS. They are putting out some really amazing modules lately. And if you're not following them and what they're doing, follow them on GitHub. If you're on other social medias, check them out there. But PowerShell Run is an app utility and function launcher for PowerShell. So it sort of empowers you to launch more and easily, and sort of has some TUI elements as well, which is really cool, all from PowerShell. You can install a module, PowerShell Run, to get started on that. And there's a bunch of really cool commands in it, like invoke PS Run is one that you'll probably get started with. But one that I think is really cool is the, what was it called? The invoke PS Run selector. So that allows you to pipe an object to it, and it sort of creates an inline TUI, terminal user interface, allowing you to make selections and sort of an alternative to the console GUI tools options that you have there. So it's really cool to see. Again, MDGRS, I really appreciate their style because they write really cool projects that are also really stylish and sort of push things forwards a little bit more. I love cool tools like that. So definitely check it out. If you have any issues or feedback, make sure to share those on the project. Another thing I want to highlight is the PowerShell Sacred Vow. So this was tweeted by Jeffrey Snover quite a while ago, but it says, the team made a promise so important, we called it our Sacred Vow. Learn PowerShell and we'll do everything we can to make it the best investment you've ever made. And I think that a lot of people still on the PowerShell team are pretty closely tied to that promise. I think a lot of us in the community are tied to that and trying to pay that forward and help other people learn this really valuable skill that we've gotten so much out of. So if you're out there trying to sell PowerShell internally and get more buy-in from your coworkers, don't forget the Sacred Vow and sharing that along, and maybe sharing the way that it's positively impacted you and showing them how it's approachable. That is what I try to do here. The tip of the week this week is brought to you by none other than the Stephen Judd. Shout out to Stephen Judd, awesome person, very funny, definitely worth a follow. So in PowerShell, you can make use of the PS default parameter values variable to set parameter values. I have these set in my profile. His personal favorite is get help full equals true. because you should always get full help from GitHelp. I like examples personally, but there's also a nice little call out to export CSV, no type information set to true, and convert to CSV, no type information set to true. And if you haven't set up your profile, that's a great place to put a lot of your configurations that are specific to you, such as the PS default parameter values. Definitely recommend taking advantage of that, especially as you go through things and you kind of determine, hey, I always use this command with this one parameter without exception. But you can consider adding it to your PS default parameter values. Oh, and in the show notes, there's also an accompanying blog from Mike Robbins, our guest for the day, about PS default parameter values and the variable itself. Very cool. And the last thing I want to highlight, an awesome blog from Harm Veenstra. It's about PowerShell games. This is more of a fun one. There's PS Hangman, PS Wordle, and of course, as announced on the podcast recently, PowerShell. And a little thing I'll add to PowerShell, those that are using it, I think it's a really good opportunity to hone your Git command skills. Because what you'll notice as you go through PowerShell, it'll give you the verb quite quickly, and that will allow you to do git command -verb, whatever verb you see, and sort of explore the commands that were returned to you and see what would fit. So I really recommend getting very comfortable with git command. It's going to serve you very well, and this is a great opportunity to learn it without needing an actual practical work-related use case. Awesome. Well, that is our pre-show content, which means it is time for our guests to join us. And on the podcast this week, we are very fortunate to have a doubleheader, Jeff Hicks and Mike Robbins, longtime members of the community, tons of contributions, still involved, still trying to pay it forward, still making a big impact. Mike, Jeff, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Yeah, happy to have you. I think I've had both of you on in the past, so excited to have you back again. I think we're going to be talking about some of the essential skills to on-ramp your career and some things outside of just PowerShell that you should be thinking about as you go through your IT career journey. Because one thing about PowerShell, it is amazing, but you can't just use it alone in a work setting. You need to use it in context with other tools and in a team environment and all that kind of stuff. We'll be talking some Summit and all a matter of tidbits along the way. So, Jeff, I think you've been running the OnRamp program for a while now, and I think that we're sort of bringing Mike into the fold. Is that the situation?
Yeah, so I kind of, I was involved in the very first OnRamp with Don Jones and Jason Helmick, and I can't remember how many years ago that was. They moved on to other things, and I kind of stepped in because I had some visions about how I thought it should be run. I mean, we learned a lot in that first year and what people were expecting and what we thought we needed to provide for people. So the whole point of the OnRamp program, which is kind of a meeting within a meeting as part of the PowerShell Summit, is to provide a way for people coming into the industry or new IT pros to get up to speed. Because as you know, a lot of the content of the PowerShell Summit is really intense, hardcore, very high level, deep dives, however you want to phrase it. It's tough stuff. Not something that if you just finished reading the first month of Lunch's books that you're going to get a lot out of. I still encourage people to come and just let it wash over you and take in what you can, plus all the other benefits of attending that event. But we wanted something to help get people going. And so the OnRamp program is that event. As I said, I've been doing this for quite a while. As you can tell by looking at me, I need to start thinking about sitting by the dock doing crosswords, drinking wine, and letting other people carry on. So Mike has volunteered to step up and will be the successor to running the event. So this year, I'm kind of taking lead. Mike is assisting. Next year, Mike will assist, Mike will lead next year, and I will assist, and then it's all Mike. And then I can decide how much I still have the old man energy to kick around or stay around or play golf, or I don't play golf, but the whatever the metaphor for playing golf is in the PowerShell community. Anyway, so that's kind of where we are going. So this year's event is very similar to the events we've had the last couple of years, where there is kind of a balance of technical content and kind of soft skills or non-technical content, things that we think, if you want to be in IT and also be a part of our community, things that you should start learning and be exposed to. So that's kind of where we're starting from.
Mike, are you excited about that? How are you feeling about it?
So I'm very excited. So I've been to the PowerShell Summit as an attendee and speaker for the last 10 years. I think last year was 10 years. So I've done a lot of other efforts, been an MVP, and the only reason I'm not an MVP anymore is because I'm now a Microsoft employee. But so I write the content for Azure PowerShell, but it's kind of the next step. I wanted to find something where I could have the most impact. And I think this is the place where I can have the most impact.
I appreciate that approach. Yeah, find the ways where you can really multiply your efforts, because to get to where you are and to know what you've known, it certainly has taken quite a while. And you want to be able to pay that forward in an efficient way, which is really cool to see. And I'll say I really appreciate the approach of, rather than just being like, I'm done and leaving. And this is kind of a throwback to a recent episode I did with Graham, who actually won an OnRamp scholarship last year, which is where you, as PowerShell people, we like automation. We like creating systems that will outlast us. At least I do a lot. And it's really cool to see that this is not a PowerShell script you all are working on together. This is a in-person type event where you're providing value to humans, but you still have that sort of approach to making sure it exists past you. So really cool to see that. And that happens in a lot of different areas. Like you mentioned, Don moving on and passing forth the torch. So really cool to see that happening in our community, and new opportunities and new people getting into it. It always surprises me how many people are still in the same spot as some of those of us who are more, involved in the community were several years ago. So there's still a nice healthy pipeline of getting people into PowerShell and empowering their careers to automate and do really cool things.
Yeah, let me add something here, since you kind of sparked it in my head here, something I wanted to mention anyway. The PowerShell community is only as good as the people who are active and involved in it. And one of the first things that we did years ago was set up a way so that people like Don could leave and the organization wouldn't die, right? So the event continues, even though Don and Jason and myself, people who were very important in the beginning and getting the event going, we could step away and the event would continue to go. We still need to do that, but the only way that we can do that is we need to have the community and other people step up and get involved. So Mike was kind enough and interested enough to say, hey, Jeff, let me help. Let me get involved and basically become my shadow and then take over. There are other people in the organization, like James and Missy and John, people who run the event. They can't be there and won't be there forever. But so in order for the event to continue going and the organization and the community, we need people to step up and say, hey, Missy, I would like to help you out. Show me what you do and let me help you. And maybe eventually I can do what you do, and then you can go and do other things, and you're not going to be stuck doing this for another, and I don't mean stuck in a negative way, but you won't be, having to do this for another 10 years. Let me come in and let me help. So we need more people to step up and decide, yep, you know what? I want to get involved. What can I do to help? So I'm hoping this year at the summit, if you're one of those people listening to this now, talk to James or Mitzi or Mike or me and say, hey, what can I do to get involved? How can I help?
And that approach, and I love approaches like that, it's the best from every perspective. For the people who are moving on, you get, if it outlasts you and it continues adding value to others, what's more gratifying? Having something you've put a lot of effort into just going away, or being able to see it outlive you? From my experience in the ways that I have, it's way more gratifying to have contributions that outlive you currently working on it. It also takes pressure off when you have a plan and it's not all on your shoulders. Like there's a certain amount of pressure if you weren't to think that way to maybe contribute when you're having a year where there's not extra resources or you want to go a different direction. You're not pigeonholing yourself in there. And it also, big one here, it helps so many others in such a larger way. So really magnifying those efforts, which is really cool. Slight sidebar here. The scripting challenge, the PowerShell Podcast scripting challenge, posited by none other than Jeff Hicks. This is your last call to get your submissions in. Jeff, that's on your GitHub, right?
Yeah, there's a gist that's published that has the description of the problem, and a few people have already submitted their solutions. So I'm hoping people will look at it and come up with a solution, then just post a link to your solution in the comment. Mm-hmm. And then you have promised swag.
Swag it is.
Some sort. So we'll
swag it up.
People to decide who has the whose contribution is swag worthy.
That's right. And I've heard from a few people that they love these types of challenges, but I'm just talking to you, Mark. They don't always submit, which I get. There's a lot of things going on. But let's get some more submissions in there and see if we can't make this more of a regular thing and get more people involved and sort of open up the way for people to perhaps write their first function, get on GitHub for the first time, make it a great on-ramping experience. We can have more people in the community contributing to projects, being engaged, and ultimately making the tools and our experience as PowerShell is better. So love to see that. And
the point with these challenges is not to come up with the solution. I mean, it is come up with the solution, but the solution is irrelevant. Coming up with code that solves my challenge is not going to change your life. But the process that you go through to learn how to do something, that's what will change your life. That's what will make your PowerShell skills more valuable. You will learn something. So it's the journey, it's the process to that end result. That's what matters. The end result itself is irrelevant. It's what you learned along the way to get there. So that's why I encourage people to do things like this and look at other people's submissions. See, how did they approach the problem? Maybe they use a technique or a concept that you never heard of before. So you learn in multiple ways by tackling things like this. And I'll point out, even though, Iron Scripter is kind of on hiatus for this year, if you go to the Iron Scripter website, there are still lots of challenges that I wrote over the last couple of years that you can still, even though I think the comments probably have automatically been closed on that, you can still work on those. And a lot of them, I have posted my own solution. So find an Iron Scripter challenge, work on it, and then compare your solutions to other solutions that people have posted.
And go ahead, Mike.
So back in the day, so Jeff had one of these challenges when it was a train signal before Pluralsight. And it's when I first got started with PowerShell and I entered that competition, I ended up winning the competition. And I have a copy of one of Jeff's courses, train signal courses on PowerShell 3 that's on DVD.
Wow.
Yeah, that's why we used to do it. 18
that's
hours
awesome.
on DVD of, PowerShell 3. Yeah.
Wow. I missed those days in the PowerShell world. Oh, you have it on hand.
That's a collector's item.
Ready to go. And I'll say to take it.
I'll sign it.
To take that challenge a step further too, if you want it to be something you can, not just for your own learning experience, maybe you're newer and you need a little bit more ways to prove that you have some technical skill, blog about it. Blog about the different, your thought process as you went through it. Again, no one in the community is going to roast you if your command or function or whatever you come up with isn't perfect. Not at all. And especially if you start getting into the habit of sharing what you learn and how you're going about things as time goes on, you'll obviously continue to get better. But it's really cool to be able to track that growth and be able to share that with others. Because I don't know about you all, but whenever I see someone newer to PowerShell who starts blogging, I love watching the journey. I love watching them continue to contribute, do bigger things, learn more, feel more confident in their skills, feel like they are more involved and engaged in the community. It is certainly the right thing. So if you haven't gone about that, go for it. And, while we got Mike here, shout out to the PowerShell community blog. You can, if you don't want to spin up your own blog and you want to write about something you've done, the PowerShell community blog is there for you to hear about whatever cool things you're doing in the PowerShell world. Now, and I know that blogging has been pretty integral to both of your PowerShell journeys, right? I think that you all are both very prolific blog writers. I know, Jeff, you do blogs and you have a newsletter type thing that you do that covers all types of educational stuff. I think most recently you did some Write Progress blog.
Yeah, and my premium newsletter, which I moved off of Substack and it's now on a different platform. I did a little article on how the best way to use Write Progress instead of using Write Host and other better practices to present progress information for long-running code.
Yeah, and now Mike's a professional writer, so he really took that and ran with it.
Oh, he's been a professional writer for a long time,
right?
But now he's making the big bucks. He's making the big Microsoft blue bucks.
So I haven't blogged since November 30th. I was taking a look at my blog, but it's mikefrobbins.com, of course. That's my branding. I'm a big believer in personal branding, and that's one thing I'll tell the attendees too. And if you do something, even if it's been done before, just go ahead and blog it, because it's a different perspective, even if it's on the same thing. And it's also fresh content. So if somebody sees something that's like 10 years old, they're less likely to go view it than if it was written last week.
Even though the content that's 10 years old may still be perfectly relevant.
Yes.
It's just unfortunate that people see something old and think, oh, that's old. It's of no value to me.
I think it's just lack of experience is why they think that. Because I think in a lot of technologies like Python, I know there's like 2 to 3 and there's all these changes, and people, if they don't have the knowledge, they think that maybe it isn't relevant. But fortunately with PowerShell, a lot of the old content massively still applies. There are, especially in the core stuff, there's not that many differences whatsoever. And those core concepts you can learn from anywhere. And if a resource resonates with you and you can learn from it, that's really all that matters.
Yep.
Now, Mike, you mentioned personal branding, and I'm trying to work on my personal branding. I know you were an MVP before. I'm working my way there. Do you have any tips for me? Have you seen anything I'm doing that I should do better? I know I need to blog more. I'm working on one coming out maybe in a month or so. But do you have any tips for me? I know you listen to the podcast and stuff.
Yeah, it seems like you're doing everything right. I mean, you're hosting a podcast. You've got a user group. So blogging, write a book, speaking. I know you're speaking as well. You're speaking at the PowerShell Summit that's coming up.
Yeah. My goal is to do more PowerShell talks at non-PowerShell conferences, maybe some security conferences, maybe more general sysadmin-y stuff, and try and tap in and help that audience get on-ramped into PowerShell. But a book, I don't know if I'm built like that. I think you all are both built different. I wrote a chapter, and we'll talk about this book a little bit more later in the PowerShell conference book too. And I was reading through it yesterday, preparing for a blog, kind of seeing what I said in the past. And I was remembering how stressful that experience was. Maybe it'd be better now that I'm like better at time management and stuff like that, and have some more experience doing public stuff. But books are no joke. How do you all deal with those timelines?
You can do it.
One thing I like to do, so I'll write everything in Markdown. So even my notes, I have a certain application I use for notes. And that way, if I write a note and I want to pull it into a blog article, a book, or even a document at Microsoft, that I can just copy that content and paste it. And I'm using the same styling across the board now. So that's one thing. I mentioned I hadn't blogged since November 30th. But what I've been doing is going back through the PowerShell 101 book and updating it and changing all the styling. And the book was originally written in 2017, but like we talked about, it's still relevant because it's on Windows PowerShell 5.1. So I've gone through and updated it for Server 2022 and also Windows 11. But the styling that I was using before was totally different than what we use at Microsoft. So we have certain tools as well, and they're open source tools. I mean, we use VS Code. I use something called Veil, which is like a linter. And then I'm using semantic line feeds. So I try to get the most mileage out of the same content. So when I was working for outside of Microsoft, I would blog about what I did at work, and then I would speak about it. So I was getting more mileage out of the same content.
Yeah, that's the way to do it. Come up with a system that works for you and go from there. And I think that also with the whole blog writing thing, it does get your mind used to thinking in systems to a certain amount, right? Because you're writing these blog posts, they're getting turned into this, they're getting reformatted, and there's some automations that take place. And as you get more comfortable with that, it doesn't take up brain space. Because I know initially that whole repository, how do files work, turning into a website thing, for me at least, was a little bit confusing. Like I had to actively think about it. And then eventually it's just, you get how it works. And you can take those same principles and apply them to different systems and different automations and different repositories and things like that. And they're definitely helpful skills to get. But I think I need to add some more of that note taking into blog posts because, and I harp on this a lot, blog posts don't have to be a book or a chapter. It can be a few paragraphs surrounded with like maybe a few lines of PowerShell that you wrote that solved the problem for you. Or you ran into an issue that you had to work around. And that's it. You just share the workaround that you ended up finding because maybe in the future you'll run into it, or maybe other people have ran into it. That you don't have to be blowing people's minds and only blogging about huge projects that you write. There is totally tons of space to make it a sort of a work pad for what you've been doing and what you've been learning. It sort of goes with you. It's like a resume of sorts. You don't really have to prove what you know.
Yeah, I just posted a blog post. And on my main blog, I'm worse than Mike. I hadn't posted anything since last August. So I thought I have to get back. So I posted something today that's really nothing more than just a tip, something that I found that I could do to make my life easier. So it's not a super long article, which people appreciate anyway, because they don't have time to read something really lengthy. And they can say, oh, well, that's pretty cool. I think I could use that. Or, yeah, I don't really need that. But that's all my article is. And I was nice to see that my WordPress site is updated enough now that I can basically write it in Markdown locally and then just upload the file and I'm done. So I'm like Mike. I do everything in Markdown. I've started using Obsidian as my kind of note-taking app because everything is done in Markdown. So
I've heard great things about that.
Yeah.
Obsidian.
Yeah, I'm using Obsidian as well.
That's a good solution right there. So we mentioned OnRamp, and one really cool thing about PowerShell Summit is that they give scholarships. And back in the day, my first PowerShell conference, I was fortunate enough to receive the scholarship to be able to go. And it's really cool. Back in the day, they only had one. And I think, Jeff, you mentioned, I think there's 7 for this upcoming year.
There's 7 for this year. Yeah, you were the original golden child.
Yep. And you know what? When you empower people to, help lift them up, you never know what they can do to help further that mission. And also help elevate their careers and provide opportunities to people that may not otherwise have it. So it's a really cool thing to see. And I think that whenever someone sponsors, like whenever they get a new sponsor, I think that there's like 1 seat that's given. And also the OnRamp is funded partially by books that are all proceeds go to the OnRamp. And there's a bunch of those books actually over the years. I know we mentioned the PowerShell conference books, 1, 2, and the third one, I believe, is called Modern IT Automation. And links to all these are in the show notes. I highly recommend you check them out. Pick one up if you're paying it for yourself. If your company can expense it, buy a few. They are super valuable. I know like the PowerShell Conference one was written several years ago. But again, a lot of the things that are in there are still highly relevant. And if you are able to read that book and just take one solution away or one new project or one new way of approaching things, because these are pretty in-depth, right? You have like 15, 25 page chapters that really are able to get into some depth from a bunch of different great authors. So definitely check those out. And I think PowerShell 101 is also on that list, Mike, you were saying?
Yes. So when I started at Microsoft, one thing I found when people were trying to start using Azure PowerShell is the analogy I like to use is people were trying to build a house before they learned how to use a hammer. So they were trying to use Azure PowerShell without knowing the PowerShell language. So what I decided to do was donate my book to Microsoft, and now it's integrated in the documentation. So you can go read it for free if you want to. But I decided that I had made my money on the book, and so anybody who does go buy the book, the proceeds go toward OnRamp. And like I said, I've actually just completed chapter 10 with all the styling and some minor updates. And now I'm reading back through it. So it's something that I've been updating since like 2017. And there's a over 27,500 readers today of the book, not counting the people who have read it for free.
That's huge. That's got to feel good.
Yeah, I get a lot of feedback about the book, and like I said, that's one of the reasons I've shifted my focus from my blog to updating the book, because I did want it updated before the summit this year, and then I'll jump back to blogging, and of course, in addition to my day job of writing.
It's a balance, right?
Yeah, the thing about the PowerShell conference books, that you mentioned that are up on LeanPub, is they were designed, or we came up with the idea, so that if you can't go to Summit, if that's not in your budget or schedule or whatever, but still want to know, what am I missing? The book is supposed to be, in essence, a book version of what the content would be if you attended the event. So each chapter is basically the same content that someone would present at Summit. So that's why a lot of the chapters tend to be really deep dive content into some particular PowerShell topic or concept. So if you want to know, hey, what's it like at Summit? Pick up one of the PowerShell conference books and read it. So you'll learn something, you'll contribute to the scholarship program, and hopefully you'll have fun along the way.
Yeah, there's a lot of really good content in there.
Yeah, and with the PowerShell conference book, it's similar to what, I learned a lot of things from Jeff and Don Jones and different ones, that when you're tired of doing something, find somebody else to take it over who has the energy to continue with it. So the PowerShell conference book, it was really tough because even some of the chapters weren't written by English was not everybody's first language that wrote chapters in the book, because we have authors worldwide. So at the end of the first book, and Jeff was, a big help on that. He was one of the editors. But Mikey Lombardi was the other editor. So I looked at Mikey and I said, hey, how about you take this and write another one? So Mikey was the lead person on number 2. And then he brought in Mark Krause. So there's actually 3 PowerShell conference books, and then the 4th is a modern IT automation. But Mark Krause took and did the 3rd one. So we've turned it over to somebody different every time. And that's very similar to what Jeff is now doing with OnRamp.
Yeah, and it's cool to see now you're on the Docs team, or working on Docs at Microsoft, Azure PowerShell. Mikey's working on Docs at Microsoft as well. So when you do these types of community projects, it's helpful to you as well. It's not just a selfless effort. It does, and I love this. When you're doing things the right way, it benefits everyone involved. You're able to massively help other people in a large way that could potentially change their lives and their families' lives and their work lives in a pretty impactful way. But also you increase your job security. You open yourself up to more opportunities. You have a better sense of belonging and purpose with what you do. Because I think a lot of us, if you're listening to this right now, you probably love PowerShell. But to be able to take it to the next step and really get that fulfilling, wholesome stuff, I love that stuff personally. It really motivates me.
It's one of the things I like about OnRamp. You get to have lunch with all the attendees. Some of the main sessions, you're in there with all the attendees. So you're getting a chance to network with people in the industry, because I met Sean Wheeler for the first time at the PowerShell Summit in 2018. And I wouldn't have the job I have today if it wasn't Sean recruited me for this. So then when we needed somebody else, I had met Mikey Lombardi at the PowerShell Summit. So I recruited Mikey. Also, I recruited Josh Duffney for a position, and he's a cloud advocate now. So, networking and putting yourself out there. I know we're all introverts, but you'll learn that everybody there probably is an introvert. They feel the same way you feel. Even, when I present, I still get nervous, but after speaking for about 5 minutes, then that wears off, and you realize that people are there just to learn. It's kind of like YouTube videos. I've watched some that are in foreign languages that I don't speak. Hey, I can just mute it and watch what the person's typing and learn from them. And I said, hey, if I can learn from them, then there's something that I can teach and that everybody else can teach.
And to your point about being able to go to Summit and be amongst people, from what I've seen and experienced firsthand and what I do now, it's if just the PowerShell Summit community is so welcoming. If someone finds out you're newer or you're interested or you're working on something, there is such a willingness to help and to form real connections. I think a lot of us, especially listening to this podcast, maybe are sort of the only champions of PowerShell at their work, or they're kind of fighting upstream. Maybe they don't have much automation, whatever the case may be. But when you're able to be around people who've gone through that process of really getting things tuned up and automated, you're able to cut your challenges a lot shorter because you have a support system. You have people you can talk to. You aren't just fighting these challenges alone. So it's really awesome. And it's been really transformative for my life and career to be able to experience that firsthand. And I think that that's the experience that whenever I talked to Graham, who did the OnRamp, he had a very similar experience. And just that summit vibe is so good. I can't wait. I think it's at the time this is posted, I don't know, maybe 30 days away, maybe something like that. But there'll be some code in the show notes so you can check out how far away PowerShell Summit is. And like we said earlier, if you're not able to attend, which is totally understandable, there's people all around the world in different budgets. We get it. Check out the books. And also the YouTube videos will be up afterwards. And if you see a speaker or a topic you really like, don't hesitate to reach out.
In addition to, our summit, there's also the PSConf EU videos as well. So, and those are pretty much all in English. Certainly over the last couple of years, they're all in English, so anyone can watch them. So you've got two big events that you can tap into, even if you can't attend in person.
You've been.
But you really should try to attend in person because you're missing out on so much more.
There really is just a hard to measure impact of the in-person element, especially as introverts, right? We don't get that many experiences to really be in that space, especially with so many like-minded people in sort of a welcoming environment. But Jeff, you've been to PSConf EU, right?
Yeah, I was in Prague last year, and yeah, that was awesome. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
I'm hoping to go one day. It's on my list. The goals.
Yeah.
Now, I want to give a shout out to Mike Robbins. Mike, you hooked me up with some awesome podcast equipment, man. I got it running, and man, it is sweet. I feel like a pilot over here. So for those who don't know, Mike sent me some awesome podcast equipment. This board with all these buttons and switches and knobs got me feeling like a pilot out here. So I just want to say a huge thanks to you, Mike. I don't think I've gotten a chance to thank you on the pod before, but really appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm glad you're getting some use out of it. It's something that I purchased and I was going to use it for like training videos or whatever, but I've found that I prefer to use a headset because, when I was moving, that my voice would be at different levels. And I'm also the type of person, when I have something that I'm not using, if I haven't used it in like a year or whatever, then I don't need it. I'm more of a minimalist, but I'm not just going to throw it away. And it's like, hey, it's worth half of what I paid for it. So find somebody, I really enjoy. This is my favorite podcast. The number one I listen to when I'm commuting to like take children to school and stuff like that. So I listen to it like in 20 minutes sessions. But anyway, so find somebody who needs that equipment and give it to them and let them be productive with it.
Definitely. Love that. And I'm trying to make good use of it. I'm trying to put it to good use. So appreciate that. Now, we've been talking about a whole bunch of stuff, but I sort of want to identify what outside of PowerShell, what are the core skills that you need to learn in IT? And I know that this sort of ties into what the OnRamp curriculum or schedule is looking like this year, but what are some of those non-PowerShell skills that you sort of really need to power up and have a successful career in IT?
You want to take that, Mike, or add your 2 cents and I can...
We'll go one at a time.
Sure.
How about that?
Sure. So the number one thing I would say is curiosity. You've got to be curious, and you've got to want to learn. I mean, if you don't want to learn something new just about every day, then you probably shouldn't be working in IT. Because I started working for IBM in 1994, and I was still in college at that point, and had been in the military prior to that. So I'm kind of telling my age here, but so when I was in the military, got the Army College Fund GI Bill, went to college after that, and started with IBM while I was in college. And I was installing like point of sale and doing all sorts of hardware, really, and then shifted over to doing more software. But I was pointing and clicking in the GUI. And at one point in time, I said I spent the first third of my career pointing and clicking in the GUI. And it got where it was very repetitive and it wasn't fun anymore. And PowerShell put the fun back in IT. So, and one of the reasons I'm doing this, and also I've written the books, I write the blog, is to save IT pros from themselves, especially the ones who are reluctant to learn PowerShell, the ones that say, they say, you start talking about objects, properties, and methods, and they say, wait a minute, I'm not a developer. Well, you don't have to be a developer.
Yeah. And I think I can relate to that curiosity bit, but also, so I've been curious and stuff, but I also for a while thought that learning PowerShell was not really an attainable skill. Like it was too advanced. It was just too far out of my wheelhouse. And over time that was sort of chipped away at as I started to do more things myself and meet other people who I found out were just humans. They weren't super geniuses who had something special that others don't. It's just a matter of time and effort and allowing yourself to be confused, to be curious, to pursue things, and to take challenges that are approachable for you. You can't not know any PowerShell and take on writing a huge module. You should probably start with something a little bit simpler and work your way up. But as long as you're on that path and headed in the right way, you will eventually get there if you're learning the right things. Now, what about Azure? Is that a critical skill, you think?
So I do think cloud is critical skill. And of course, many companies are multi-cloud. So that's one of the benefits of using PowerShell is you can use PowerShell to manage the environment for any cloud you're on. And also everybody's going to have a certain amount of on-prem equipment. So, I used to provision even my storage area networks on-prem with PowerShell. So I had the scripts, I could set the ACLs, I could configure the different LUNs. And if I needed for disaster recovery purposes, I could just rerun those scripts and reconfigure new storage. But one thing that you mentioned, so I try to break PowerShell down the way that I learned it. So of course I mentioned I was pointing and clicking in the GUI, and I would take a task that I would do in the GUI and I would use a one-liner to perform the same task. So I started out with one-liners. So it's like get in the kiddie pool, you don't jump off in the deep end, without knowing how to swim. So then over time, I started writing scripts. And then modules, it sounds like this really complicated thing, but modules are really simple. And then even background jobs, I wasn't using any of the job commandlets at one time, but once I started using them, it's like, this is really simple. So break it down into manageable chunks when you're trying to learn. I know I went to PowerShell Saturday, I think number 2 in Charlotte, I think it was in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I went to some sessions that they were just completely over my head. But then later in my career, I figured out, oh, that's what they were talking about. So it kind of clicked. But then I think PowerShell Saturday number 3 in Atlanta was the first place that I spoke at in person.
How did it go?
Oh, it went well. It went really well. I had so much content and I had practiced it so much that I really just ran through the content. And one of the really neat things I showed is having a SQL Server database and querying that database, like either Northwind or maybe AdventureWorks, and joining some stuff, and then actually creating users in Active Directory, creating like 500 users in like 90 seconds. And that way, all the spelling was all perfect. You didn't hire like a temp or somebody that created some in caps, some in lowercase, and some in mixed case, or misspellings. It was all perfect. And I used the example that, hey, the SQL Server was an HR system, and you've got to create all of these Active Directory user IDs.
Very cool. So on that list of skills we've covered so far, we got curiosity, we got cloud skills in Azure. What else do we have?
Well, I think one skill, and it's something that we're going to cover in the OnRamp program, is how you write and manage your code. And that means learning how to use source control and things like Git and GitHub. So Kevin Marquette is coming in to do a session to give people an introduction to Git. Now, I know enough Git to do what I need to do. Anything more complicated than adding and committing and looking at my log, I've got to look it up. And I'm fine with that. But you have to at least know some fundamental Git skills, because you will need and want to manage your code, and Git flavored things are going to be the way that you're going to do that. So that's, if you are not using Git and know nothing about Git or source control, that should be on your learning path for this year.
Yeah, source control is so important, and once you get running, it's easy to kind of maintain it, but it does seem like there's an initial hurdle for sure. I experienced it, but it is very important when we're writing, especially PowerShell scripts. If they don't exist just for you and your personal whatever, you still want to have those backed up. But if you're doing anything work related, like there's a liability there for not using source control that you should be aware of and mitigate by using source control. So that's great to see covered.
And one of the I will totally admit, Git is hard. I mean, I look at the diagrams or how Git works and all that, and it still hurts my head. And I still don't fully grasp the way that it's all working under the hood, because I guess my brain doesn't think that way. So I'm probably like a lot of beginner PowerShell people. I know what commands to type to do what I need to do. And anything more complicated than that, I need to get help with. And I'm fine with that. I have no problem admitting that I only know what I need to know, and I will go and happily get help for anything more complicated than that. But I do have, for example, in my little Obsidian notebooks, I have a page of my little Git tips and tricks that I have figured. I go, oh, I need to be able to like search my log for a commit date. And so now I have a little code that I can grep the log with Git and get the date based on my tag. So I'm never going to remember that, but I go, oh, well, I have my note in my notebook, and I can look it up and go, oh, that's how I do that. So,
and if things hit the fan, there's always dangitgit.com. That's sort of a resource to help you understand how to use Git when things go wrong and you need to figure things out, because Git is hard. So it is awesome.
Hard. When you first get started, Git really needs to be one of the first things you learn, because you need to save even your simple scripts. Because the problem I ran into is like you have a script and you'll refactor it. And then 3 months down the road, you'll say, oh, I wish I remembered how I did something 3 months ago. Well, if you don't have the history, then you've forgotten it. But you can go back in history and Git and determine how you did that, because maybe you have a different project that requires the same code. And that way it's a copy and paste instead of having to figure something out all over again.
Yeah, definitely make sure you start using Git, start poking around, because you'll get that sort of baseline understanding that Jeff mentioned. And if things get really blow up in your face, there are resources to help you. There are people who can guide you on the path to rebase or reset or whatever you need to do. Don't rebase or do whatever I said. Look it up and find it out yourself, because I really don't know. I know those are things and people have strong opinions about those, but very cool.
When you go to work for a company and you have thousands of changes in your upstream repository every day, and then your branch gets out of date, it's much more challenging. And if you do a merge instead of a rebase, then all those changes can appear like they're part of your PR, your pull request. If you would have done a rebase, then, and I will say that Mikey Lombardi is like the expert on our team. So if I get really messed up, I reach out to Mikey.
That's a good call. Maybe I'll get him on to talk about some advanced Git situations and how to save yourself from Git.
That's why I'm glad I just work for myself and only have to deal with my own.
Yeah, just one developer you got to keep in track.
Yeah. Worst case, I just delete it and re-clone it from GitHub if I totally screwed up.
And that's one of the benefits of networking with people is you can't know everything, but you have these contacts that you can reach out to when you need advanced help on the topic.
Exactly. And you can be that same resource for other people. So it's a really cool, I mean, it's just why the community is so great, because we are so much better when we are together than we are alone. And it just feels better too, to exist in that world. So shout out to the amazing PowerShell community, helping people, helping yourselves. It's a good time. I think a couple other topics we have are containers and what is DevOps. I think that's a pretty important one to be aware of. I know that whenever I was getting into PowerShell, DevOps was a whole brand new thing, and there were some new books being written about it, and it was sort of this wave. And now I think it's more of like an established practice and approach to collaboration, developing software, and all that kind of stuff inside of a company. But what is containerization? or containers?
Containers would be things like Docker, where you have not quite a VM, but it is a software-defined space that kind of has everything contained within it that you would need to do. So you can download and install a very stripped down, like a Windows container that has PowerShell running, for example. They're often used in, for our purposes, for like testing, like Pester test. You could spin up a Docker VM or a Docker container, run your code in the Docker container if you want to do some acceptance testing or infrastructure testing to make sure that your code works. And of course, containers are used in production for software with Kubernetes and high availability and all of this stuff. That's not something that I ever deal with, but we've got Anthony Nocentino, who's one of the best on that to do his talk. So because we talked about with DevOps, we talked about with the OnRamp program, is we want to bring people up to speed on stuff that we do in the main event. So even though when we're talking about the PowerShell Summit, the other part of the name is the plus DevOps. And there's a lot of PowerShell content it's in the main summit, that it's basically how do you apply the PowerShell language. And typically that is with stuff like Pester or Azure or AWS or something DevOps related. So we try to provide information in the OnRamp program to give people an introduction. If they have no idea what Azure is, Mike's going to say, hey, this is what Azure is. Just enough so at least you can be in a conversation with someone and understand the terms and concepts. You're no way are going to be an Azure expert, after the OnRamp program, but you'll know enough to get started and know where to go to learn more. So we've got people coming in, for example, Josh King is going to come in and talk about Ansible and give people a taste of Ansible. Who else do we have here? Oh, Joe Hughes is going to do an introduction to release automation. So we're going to talk about CI/CD pipelines. And again, that's not something that everyone is going to need right away. It's a topic that comes up in the main PowerShell Summit. But we want to introduce people to that topic so they can decide, oh, yep, that's something that interests me. I want to pursue that further. Or, yep, that's good to know, and I'll move on to something else. So we're going to cover things like that. I'm going to do a session. I think I'm still doing a session, kind of an intro to DSC and configuration management. Again, that's another topic that gets some attention in the main event. So for the OnRamp people, we want people to know, hey, when someone says DSC, this is what they mean. And this is how it works. This is why you'd want to use it. Here's some skills that you can get out of it. Here's how you apply the PowerShell knowledge. And it really comes back to, Snover's, sacred vow, which the PowerShell team is still very strong about. You talk to Jason Helmick and he'll absolutely tell you, yes, we are totally behind the sacred vow, even all these years later. So PowerShell is a glue language. Once you learn PowerShell, then you can apply it to stuff like Azure, AWS, DSC, Ansible, containers. You learn the core stuff, and then you build from on top of that, and then your career builds on top of that. And you learn one thing, you learn something else, you start putting disparate things together and go, oh, well, I can do this, and I can pull this from over here, and all of a sudden your boss is saying, hey, well, look what he's doing, and he's cranking out high quality code and solving problems, and yeah, we need to keep him here. We need to send him to sessions like the PowerShell Summit so we can learn more. It's a sacred vow also to yourself. So you learn the language, you get involved in the community, and it just snowballs. And before you know it, you're Andrew sitting comfortably at home doing a podcast listened by thousands and thousands of people thinking, I want to be like Andrew.
Oh, well, yeah.
No pressure there.
Yeah, no pressure. No. What I will say, though, is that by highlighting all these different topics and things like that, you obviously learn really important things and sort of roadmap all the different parts of a lot of current IT teams, but also you empower yourself to follow along in conversations. Because even in the PowerShell podcast, we mention some of these terms and we don't always define everything because there is a certain amount of assumed knowledge. And sometimes I do define things and break things down. But when you're able to know these different roles, even if you're not an expert at it or have done several things at work with it, you're able to follow along and understand how companies work in context with all the different things they offer. I know we recently did a security podcast and talked about how there's so much to know. It's hard to get in entry level. I think similar kind of things apply. There's a lot of technologies and things that are at play and kind of working together that rely on each other and connect in different ways that you have to sort of know, have a breadth of knowledge to be able to intelligently communicate and act on.
Yeah, even though your current job your current company may not use Azure, that's not to say that your next job is all heavily Azure based. Or maybe the better job you can get is if you come with some Azure experience or can at least talk Azure. Don't assume, we talked about this a lot too in the OnRamp program, don't assume that your job is your career. Where you work now is not your career. Your career is what you learn and what you bring to the table. Your job right now, again, unless you're involved with the boss's, offspring, the whole world is open to you. And that's, again, a nice thing about coming to places like PowerShell Summit or user groups or PowerShell Saturdays is you never know the next job you get, as Mike has already proven here, could come from someone that you meet at one of these events. So it's very imperative that you get involved in the community to advance your career, enhance your life, and get more out of what you're doing.
And I think that initiative shows. And I think that employers really value being able to see that, oh, hey, this person has shown initiative in taking ownership of their career and contributing and showing how they learn. You're just going to find yourself able to not only feel more confident in pursuing new roles, but also more people will be interested in you because you sort of do have this working resume to go off of.
Yeah, sadly, I have met people, because I've been in IT for over 30-something years, and I have met people who are very happy, do their 9 to 5, go home, and that's all they do. Unless the boss is going to pay me to do it, I'm not doing it. And I know that those people are, and they may be perfectly happy with what they're doing. And I guess that's fine. If you're happy with what you're doing, then fine. If you can meet your family's needs but I think for a lot of people, they want more than that. And if you want more than that, you have to be willing to put in and invest in your own career. Don't assume that your employer is going to invest in your career. It's great if they can. Take as much as you can from them. But don't be afraid or understand. And I totally get everyone has a different situation and family requirements and budgets and all that. I totally get that. But the more that you can invest in your career, the further you'll go. And even investing in your career is doing something as simple as listening to this podcast on a weekly basis. Even if you just pick up a few tidbits, that is still investing in your career because you are expanding your skill set. And if you can show your employer or a future employer, hey, this is what I can do, this is what I know, that's all to the better.
Yeah, I definitely recommend that. You get exposed to new things, get your mind creative. I know that there are people who listen to this podcast who haven't transitioned into IT yet. I know of a few that are sort of using this as their way to pave the path and learn about new things and even just see how people who are successful communicate about these topics and how they approach problems and all that kind of thing. So definitely agree with that. And it sort of has a similar sentiment to the PowerShell sacred vow of like, not just invest in PowerShell, but invest in yourself and your career. Buy into yourself. It is more than just your job. It is your career. It is what we spend a lot of time working. So if we can make that experience better, if we can automate more of our problems away, if we can feel more comfortable with our ability to find a new job if we need it, maybe a little bit less stress, it's just a better world to be living in. So I hope those of you out there who are kind of on the fence, or, if you're listening to this podcast, I think you've already come a pretty long way, especially if you're an hour into it like now, but invest in yourself. You can do amazing things. You don't need to be a super genius. There are many people who are very successful, and all that they did was just keep learning, keep tackling the next challenge, and keep growing. It could be fast. It could be slow. We're all on different timelines. There is not really a race unless you have like financial requirements or things like that, but there's no race. And just settle in and enjoy the journey. Find out a process that works for you, improve it over time, keep learning, and great things will come.
Yeah, it comes back to what Mike said earlier about being curious.
Yep.
You have to be curious about, how does this thing work? And that's what I love doing with PowerShell. It's trying to figure out, wow, I can do this. Oh, I wonder if I can do that. And instead of me just saying, wonder what I could do, I just do it. People would come up to Don and me all the time and say, what would happen if I do X in PowerShell? And Don would say, well, I don't know. What would happen? Did you try it? So that's really what you have to do. Don't just be thinking and go, oh, what would happen? What would happen? Just do it. If it fails, great. Then it failed. Look at the error message. Don't just ignore it and say, okay, where did I go wrong? What can I learn from this? So just do it. Be curious. And it will take time. I have certainly banged my head plenty of times as well. My skull is much thicker now, but I've learned along the way. And then I share what I learned with other people to maybe take away some of their pain. It's just all a big virtuous community cycle.
Completely agree with that. Awesome. Well, two topics I want to highlight that are emphasized in the PowerShell community and in OnRamp specifically, and that is soft skills and community. And to me, those are two very critical elements to your career longevity. Obviously, communicating and empathizing is going to be massively helpful for getting your perspective heard, solving problems. A lot of times, especially we mentioned DevOps and things like that, you're going to be working with different teams potentially, and being able to comfortably communicate is going to massively empower you, especially because there's a little bit of a lacking of that skill, at least historically in IT. So if you can be the one who's able to communicate across teams and get things going, you're going to have a lot more success. And it's really cool to see that there's an emphasis put on the community as well, because I think that so many people who I see being successful are engaged in the community, are learning things from the community. They are not just on a hill by themselves figuring everything out. They are building on the shoulders of others and creating their own works that others can build on as well. And, I heard there's a really good speaker for that session, for the community session.
Yeah, let's hope so. I hope he shows up.
I hope so too. If it didn't, that'd be a bad thing. Awesome, guys. Well, I think we covered a ton today. It was a pleasure speaking with you, but I do have a couple final questions.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I know. I got one for you, Jeff, first. This is specifically for you. If PowerShell was a classical piece of music, which one would it be? We got some Beethoven. What do we got here? Because I know you're a composer.
Yeah.
Let's tap into that part of your brain.
What comes to mind is a Mahler symphony. So Gustav Mahler, kind of turn of the 20th century, late 19th, early 20th century, very heavily romantic period. So very, I don't want to say turbulent, but it can be very passionate and emotional on the surface, but underneath there's a depth and a passion to the music, even though it's also at times can be very emotional and carrying you away. So I think there's a lot that we do in the PowerShell community that it's kind of like that. It's very emotional, and there's definitely a passion to the community. So I'm going to say Gustav Mahler.
Gustav Mahler. All right. And I'll get a song link for you or from you to put in the show notes if people want to hear what PowerShell is.
Yeah. Okay.
Awesome. Now, Mike, I have a wild question for you. If PowerShell were a wild animal, which wild animal would it be? And you can't say a python, okay? Let's just get that right out of here.
And that's a good question.
Yeah, I know. I really put you on the spot, huh? Elephant? Maybe because it remembers everything? That's not a very good one. That's why I don't ask myself this question.
To me, just thinking about Python, so I would say that if PowerShell were a wild animal, it would actually be a king snake because it's better than all the others, and it could just certainly eat the Python, you know?
Woo! Fighting words. Dang. Somebody generated an AI image of that. Awesome. And to give a more serious question, so let's circle back to early in our careers. I know we talked about a lot of things in OnRamp that we're going to be teaching, but what is one skill, and I'll start with you, Jeff, that you wish you would have learned earlier in your career, or that you're surprised that you get so much value out of currently?
I don't know if it's so much of a skill, and I think I've talked about this on last time I was on, or at one point, but I wish I had not been so arrogant when I was younger in my career and thinking that I knew everything and I could solve all of the problems. I wish I had been a little more humble and be willing to realize, yeah, I don't really have all the answers, even though I think I do. And maybe that is just something that everyone goes through at a certain age. But I kind of wish I'd recognized that sooner and just focus more on keeping my head down and just learning what I didn't know and be more accepting that, yeah, there are things that I don't know and I don't know what I don't know. And find out what I need to know from other people to help advance and get going in my career.
Yeah, the second person you described sounds a lot more fun to work with. I'll say that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Mike, what about you?
To me, I would say get an earlier start with automation and take more chances. Because I would say the first third of my career, I was kind of like Jeff was mentioning, I was playing it safe. I was going to work. I was doing the 8 to 5 thing, not being an active participant in my own career. And I think that's, a lot of people are like that and they're perfectly happy. And I was perfectly happy. But it's a lot more fun when you can automate. When, for example, I had to delete 44 items in Azure recently, and to point and click and delete those in the GUI, I'm not going to do that. Just write a script and delete them. And then in addition to doing that for yourself, other people had to do that. So share your script with other people and put some safeguards in place where they don't delete something they shouldn't delete. But yeah, so don't play it so safe. Take more chances and start automating and put more extra hours in, because everybody says they're too busy. But when somebody says they're too busy, they mean that whatever it is they're too busy for is that they just don't want to make time for it. And I kind of talk about that in the book. They're really not too busy because they've got time to watch television and everything else. Everybody's got some time. It's kind of like budgeting. And that's the other thing is, I've gotten into this financial literacy and all that sort of stuff. So after being at my previous company 14 years, I was debt free. And it's, it's kind of worrisome to leave the sure thing for the unknown, which is what I did when I went to Microsoft. But if you keep yourself financially fit and you're operating debt free, then the worst that can happen is you're without a job, but it's not like anything's going to get repossessed,
Very true. Good insights. Awesome. Well, guys, really appreciate you being on the podcast. Thank you to everybody at home listening. If you're driving home to and from work, to and from dropping off the kids, if you're listening during your work hours, whenever you're listening to us, we appreciate you. And if you are still listening, give us a like, comment, subscribe. Check out our next Monday YouTube podcast premiere at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Join us on the Inner Circle in the PDQ Discord, the PowerShell scripting channel, discord.gg/PDQ. I'll be there. It's been really cool to see that grow over the weeks and have a lot of PowerShell focused conversations, have some previous guests in there chatting some stuff, some security, some group policy preferences, all kinds of cool stuff. I don't know what else. Oh, yes. Send us some feedback. Let me know what's up. I'm Andrew Plotech on socials, Andrew Plaw on LinkedIn. I've been posting a lot more shorts. So if you want to see some clips from episodes and things like that are nice and shareable and consumable for the broader audience, check me out there. You can send feedback also to PowerShell@pdq.com and do the scripting challenge. check out Jeff Hicks' scripting challenge. The GitHub link will be in the show notes. Links to everything we talked about will be in the show notes. Check out that song from Jeff. I'm curious to hear what it's like. Apparently, it's going to carry me away. So after this ends, I'll be listening to that. Now, Jeff and Mike, I'll start with you, Jeff. Where can people find you on the World Wide Web if they want to keep in touch and see what you're up to?
I put a link in the show notes for my github.io page, which has links to everywhere that I am socially on the internet, GitHub, my newsletter, basically my entire online life, you can find through that link. So that's
Perfect.
probably the best thing is to use that jdhitsolutions.github.io link.
Perfect. Mike?
So you can find me at mikeofrobbins.com. Robbins has got 2 B's in it. I'm on Twitter, all the other socials, but Mike F. Robbins is the branding that I use. You can also go to my About page on my blog, and this is a challenge for you. My email address is encoded on there, and it's encoded in the way that I learned from Jeff in that original scripting challenge that I mentioned earlier, the train signal one. So something I learned that long ago, I'm still using. I use it on my blog.
I'll have to check that out. It's not base 64, or is it base 64 encoded?
So I had somebody reach, and the other thing I would say is if you find something valuable from somebody, reach out to them and just say, hey, I found this and this was very helpful, because it energizes that person to get them to continue to do more. Because I had somebody reach out to me just for a typo in an 8-year-old blog article, and they said, I found your blog and I decrypted your email address on your About page, and they emailed me about it.
That's awesome. I love hearing that. Whenever I get feedback, it is massively helpful, especially for something like this. Like I like to know who my audience is and who I'm speaking to. And as I hear more, it really is energizing, because doing public stuff can be exhausting, especially if you feel like you're just screaming to the void when you're trying to help others. So whether it's the podcast, whether it's anybody in the community, especially people who don't have as large of a following, it goes such a long way to engage with them and give them some feedback, tell them if you check out their project. So love to hear that. Well, awesome. Thank you guys so much. Thank everybody at home for listening. Until next week.
Thanks for listening to the PowerShell Podcast. The PowerShell Podcast is a PDQ production, making device management simple, secure, and pretty damn quick.